The distant howl of a wolf broke the silence of the Wyoming night as Trinity Owens huddled behind an overturned wagon, clutching her father's Winchester rifle with trembling hands. 17 years of proper Boston upbringing hadn't prepared her for this moment alone in the wilderness. Her family's westbound caravan scattered after the bandit attack, with nothing but her wits and her father's final words. "Run, Trinity, don't let them catch you." That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of hiding, surviving, and fighting against the wilderness that threatened to swallow her whole. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life in California had turned to ashes before it even began. Trinity pushed a strand of copper hair from her face, her green eyes scanning the darkened horizon. The bandits were gone, but the wilderness remained vast, unforgiving, and seemingly endless. At 20 years old, she had never known such solitude or such fear. Yet beneath the fear burned something else, determination. "I won't die here," she whispered to herself, the words carried away by the wind. "I won't." Morning came with a chill that seeped through her thin dress despite the woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Trinity had managed a few hours of fitful sleep, her dreams haunted by the sounds of gunfire and her mother's screams. Now she stood, stretching her cramped limbs, and tried to decide which way to go. West seemed logical. They had been headed to California, after all, but without a map or compass, she couldn't be certain which direction was which. The rising sun provided some guidance, at least. East was behind her, and she had no intention of going back. She gathered what supplies remained: a canteen half full of water, some hardtack wrapped in cloth, her father's hunting knife, and the rifle with a dozen rounds of ammunition. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Trinity had walked for perhaps an hour when she heard the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. Her heart lurched, fear spiking through her veins. She dove for cover behind a boulder, rifle at the ready, praying the approaching rider wasn't one of the bandits returning. The rider appeared over the ridge, a solitary figure on a chestnut mare. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, and his duster coat billowed behind him as he rode. Not a bandit, she thought. They traveled in packs, but that didn't mean he was friendly. Trinity remained hidden, watching as the stranger slowed his horse and dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in this harsh landscape. She saw him kneel and examine something on the ground tracks, perhaps her own. "I know you're there," he called suddenly, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "Behind the rock. I'm not looking for trouble." Trinity's finger hovered over the trigger. "How do I know that's true?" she called back. The stranger removed his hat, revealing a face younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "My name's Gabriel Norwood," he said. "I'm a rancher from the Silver Creek spread north of here. Found what was left of your wagon train yesterday. I've been tracking survivors since." "Any survivors besides me?" Trinity asked, her voice catching. Gabriel shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry." Trinity felt a wave of grief threaten to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down. There would be time for mourning later. Right now, she needed to survive. She emerged from behind the rock, rifle still aimed at the stranger. "Trinity Owens," she said. "My family was headed to California." Gabriel nodded. "You're a long way from California, Miss Owens. And an even longer way from wherever you came from before that." "Boston," she supplied. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Boston, that explains a few things." Trinity bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing bad," Gabriel said, raising his hands slightly. "Just that you're a long way from home, and this country isn't kind to those who don't understand its ways." She lowered the rifle slightly. "I'm learning quickly. I can see that." Gabriel gestured to his horse. "My ranch is about a day's ride from here. You're welcome to come back with me. My foreman's wife can get you set up with some proper clothes, food, and a place to rest while you figure out your next move." Trinity hesitated. Going with this stranger could be dangerous, but staying alone in the wilderness would almost certainly be fatal. How do I know I can trust you?" Gabriel's expression turned serious. "You don't, but I give you my word as a gentleman that no harm will come to you under my protection, and out here a person's word is all they have." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Trinity nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Norwood. I accept your offer." "Gabriel, please," he said, offering his hand to help her mount the horse. Trinity ignored his hand and climbed up herself, causing Gabriel to raise an eyebrow in surprise. "I may be from Boston, Mr. Norwood, but I'm not helpless," he chuckled as he swung up behind her. "I can see that, Miss Owens. I can certainly see that." The ride to Silver Creek Ranch was long and largely silent. Trinity sat stiffly in front of Gabriel, acutely aware of his presence behind her. The vastness of the Wyoming territory stretched out before them, rolling plains giving way to distant mountains, the landscape dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of pine. "How far does your land extend?" Trinity asked, breaking the silence. "About 20,000 acres," Gabriel replied. "Not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land. Good water, good grass." Trinity tried to imagine owning so much land. In Boston, her father, a successful merchant, had owned a fine townhouse, but nothing on this scale. "It must be lonely," she observed. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but there's a freedom to it that I wouldn't trade for all the company in the world." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the ranch came into view. Trinity saw a large main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and a bunkhouse where she presumed the ranch hands stayed. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, and lanterns glowed warmly in the windows. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's home," Gabriel replied simply. They were met in the yard by an older man with graying hair and a weathered face. "Found yourself some company, boss," he called as they rode in. "More like she found me, Frank," Gabriel replied, dismounting and then offering his hand to help Trinity down. This time she accepted. "This is Miss Trinity Owens. Her wagon train was the one we found yesterday. She's the only survivor." Frank's expression sobered. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, miss. Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you," Trinity replied, suddenly feeling the weight of the past few days crashing down on her. Her legs wobbled and she might have fallen if Gabriel hadn't caught her arm. "Let's get you inside," he said gently. "You need food and rest." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined for such a remote location. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and bookshelves lined with volumes that would not have looked out of place in her father's library. A woman emerged from what Trinity presumed was the kitchen, middle-aged, with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Who's this you've brought home, Gabriel?" "This is Miss Trinity Owens, Mrs. Holloway," Gabriel explained. "She survived the attack on that wagon train." "Miss Owens, this is Margaret Holloway, our cook and housekeeper, and surrogate mother to every stray soul on this ranch," the woman added with a warm smile. "You poor dear, you look half dead on your feet. Let's get you a hot meal and a bath, and then we'll find you some clothes. I'm sure I have something that can be taken in to fit you." Trinity found herself guided to a chair at a large wooden table where a bowl of fragrant stew was placed before her. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate ravenously while Gabriel spoke quietly with Frank in the corner of the room. After the meal, Mrs. Holloway led Trinity to a small but comfortable bedroom and prepared a bath for her. The hot water was heaven after days in the wilderness, and Trinity scrubbed away the dirt and blood until her skin was pink and raw. Dressed in a borrowed nightgown, her hair still damp from the bath, Trinity sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for her parents, for the life they'd planned in California, for the innocence she'd lost in the span of a few violent minutes. She cried until no more tears would come, and then she crawled beneath the covers and fell into the first real sleep she'd had in days. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, she was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of her Boston bedroom. The events of the past days came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Holloway's entrance. The older woman carried a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, dear. I've brought you some things to wear. They're my daughter's. She's off in Denver now, married to a banker. They might be a bit large, but we can pin them." Trinity accepted the clothes gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." "You've been so kind." "Think nothing of it, dear. Gabriel said you're from Boston. You're a long way from home." Trinity nodded as she examined the practical cotton dress, undergarments, and sturdy boots. "My father was a merchant. He thought there would be opportunities in California." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened with sympathy. "There's breakfast when you're ready, and Gabriel would like to speak with you when you feel up to it." After dressing, the clothes were indeed too large, but Mrs. Holloway helped pin them in place. Trinity made her way to the dining room. Gabriel was seated at the table, a cup of coffee before him and papers spread out beside it. He looked up as she entered, and Trinity was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "Good morning, Miss Owens. I trust you slept well. Better than I have in days, thank you." Trinity accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway and sat across from Gabriel. "You wanted to speak with me?" Gabriel nodded, folding the papers and setting them aside. "I need to ride into town today, Willow Creek, about 3 hours from here. I thought you might want to come along. The sheriff should be informed about what happened to your wagon train, and there's a telegraph office where you could send messages to any family you might have back east." Trinity considered this. "I have an aunt in Philadelphia, but we haven't spoken in years. My parents were my only close family." She hesitated. "What will happen to me now?" Gabriel's expression was contemplative. "That's largely up to you, Miss Owens. You're welcome to stay here until you decide your next move. There's a stagecoach that passes through Willow Creek twice a month that could take you east, if that's what you want, or west, to continue to California." The thought of continuing alone to California filled Trinity with dread. Going back east seemed equally impossible. What would she do there alone? "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "You don't have to decide today," Gabriel assured her. "But I think the ride might do you good, get you out of the house, clear your head." Trinity agreed, and after breakfast, Mrs. Holloway helped her into a riding skirt and jacket. The clothes were practical and sturdy, nothing like the fashionable dresses she'd worn in Boston, but they suited the environment. Gabriel had a gentle mare saddled for her, and Trinity was grateful for the riding lessons her father had insisted upon back in Boston. She mounted with reasonable grace, adjusting to the western saddle, which was different from what she was accustomed to. "You ride well," Gabriel observed as they set off. "My father believed a lady should be accomplished in many areas," Trinity replied, "though I doubt he ever imagined I'd be putting those skills to use in Wyoming territory." Gabriel smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Life rarely goes as planned out here. The land has its own ideas." As they rode, Gabriel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the region. Trinity found herself relaxing in his company, drawn to his evident love for this wild country. "How did you end up here?" she asked. "You don't strike me as someone born to this life." Gabriel gave her an appraising look. "What makes you say that?" Trinity gestured toward him. "Your speech, the books in your home, you're educated." "My father was a professor at Yale," Gabriel explained. "He expected me to follow in his footsteps. I had other ideas." "So you ran away to become a cowboy?" Trinity asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Gabriel laughed. "Not exactly. I came west after college to visit my mother's brother who owned Silver Creek. I fell in love with the place, the work, the freedom of it. When he died 5 years ago, he left it to me." Trinity considered this. "And you've never regretted it, leaving civilization behind?" Gabriel's expression turned thoughtful. "This is civilization, Miss Owens. Just a different kind than what you're used to. Out here, a person is judged by their actions, their word, their willingness to work and help their neighbors. There's a purity to that I never found back east." They reached Willow Creek by midday. The town was small but bustling, a main street lined with businesses, a church spire rising above the buildings, horses and wagons moving about. It was nothing like Boston, but it had a vitality that Trinity found appealing. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, where Gabriel introduced Trinity to Sheriff Thomas, a gruff but kind man in his 50s. Trinity recounted the attack on the wagon train, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "Sounds like the Blackwater gang," the sheriff said grimly. "They've been hitting travelers along that route for months. I'm mighty sorry about your folks, Miss Owens. I'll send telegrams to the territorial marshals, but if they've crossed into Montana territory, there's not much we can do." Justice, it seemed, was as wild and unpredictable as the land itself. After sending a brief telegram to her aunt more to inform her of her parents passing than to seek help, Gabriel took Trinity to the town's only restaurant for a late lunch. As they ate, Trinity noticed several townspeople eyeing her with curiosity. "They're staring," she murmured to Gabriel. He nodded. "New faces are always of interest out here, especially pretty ones, and you're sitting with one of the territory's eligible bachelors, which only adds to the intrigue." Trinity felt a flush creep into her cheeks at his casual reference to her appearance. "I'm sure they're disappointed. I'm hardly dressed to impress." Gabriel's eyes met hers across the table. "On the contrary, Miss Owens. You look more at home in those clothes than most women who have lived here their whole lives." There was something in his gaze that made Trinity's heart beat faster. She looked away, flustered by her reaction to this near stranger. "You're being kind." "I'm being honest," he corrected. "It's a quality highly valued in these parts." Their return to the ranch was marked by a comfortable silence, broken occasionally by observations about the landscape or questions about ranch life. Trinity found herself watching Gabriel, the confident way he sat in the saddle, the quiet authority he projected, the gentleness with which he handled his horse. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Trinity, with no immediate plans and nowhere to go, began to help around the ranch. Mrs. Holloway taught her to cook on a wood stove, a skill she'd never needed in Boston with servants to prepare meals. She learned to mend clothes, to make soap, to tend the kitchen garden. Simple tasks, but there was satisfaction in the work that surprised her. Gabriel was often busy with ranch business, but he made time each evening to sit with Trinity on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors. They talked about books they'd read, about his life at Yale, about her childhood in Boston. Never about the attack or her losses. Those wounds were still too fresh. A week turned into 2, and Trinity found herself less and less inclined to think about leaving. The wildness of the territory that had terrified her at first now called to something deep within her, a yearning for freedom she hadn't known she possessed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the distant plains, Gabriel turned to her with unusual seriousness. "The men in town are talking about you," he said. Trinity looked at him in surprise. "About me? Why, word has spread about the Boston lady staying at Silver Creek. Several have asked if you might be interested in marriage." Trinity's eyes widened. "Marriage to men I've never even met?" Gabriel nodded, his expression unreadable. "Out here, women are scarce, especially educated ones from good families. You'd have your pick of suitors should you be interested." Trinity studied him, trying to gauge his feelings on the matter. "And what did you tell them?" "That you're still in mourning for your family and that any such discussions would be inappropriate at present." Gabriel paused. "Was I wrong to speak for you?" Trinity shook her head slowly. "No, you were right, I'm not. I couldn't consider marriage right now." She hesitated. "But I am considering staying in the territory. Not necessarily here at Silver Creek, but perhaps in Willow Creek." Gabriel's expression shifted, something like hope flickering in his eyes before he schooled his features. "The town could use a teacher. The miners' children get by with a rotating series of volunteers, but someone with proper education would be welcome." Trinity hadn't considered teaching, but the idea took root immediately. "I could do that. I had excellent schooling." "You'd need a place to live," Gabriel pointed out. Proper accommodations for a single lady. I could board with a family, perhaps, Trinity suggested. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, watching the lightning flash across the distant sky. Or you could stay here, he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. The ride to town is not so long and you'd have proper chaperonage with Mrs. Holloway in the house. Trinity felt her pulse quicken. People would talk. People always talk, Gabriel countered. But no one who knows me would think I'd act dishonorably. Trinity studied his profile, illuminated briefly by another lightning flash. And is that all it would be? An honorable arrangement between a rancher and a schoolteacher? Gabriel turned to face her fully then, his expression serious. That would be entirely up to you, Trinity. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. I think, she said carefully, that I would like to stay, at least for now. The smile that spread across Gabriel's face warmed her more than any fire could have. As summer turned to fall, Trinity settled into her new life with surprising ease. 3 days a week, she rode into Willow Creek to teach in the one-room schoolhouse. The work was challenging but rewarding, the children eager to learn despite their rough manners and limited previous education. The other days she spent at Silver Creek, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered a talent for bookkeeping, helping Gabriel organize the ranch accounts with the precision her father had taught her in his business. She learned to ride astride rather than side saddle, to identify the various grasses that fed the cattle, to predict weather changes by watching the sky. And through it all, her relationship with Gabriel deepened. It began with small gestures, a hand offered to help her mount her horse, fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. A book left on her bedside table, marked at a passage he thought she'd enjoy. The way his eyes sought hers across the dinner table, sharing private amusement at something one of the ranch hands had said. The people of Willow Creek accepted her presence at Silver Creek without much comment, though Trinity knew there was speculation. The women of the town's small sewing circle had welcomed her warmly enough, but their curious glances and careful questions about her arrangement at the ranch made their thoughts clear. "You should marry him," Mrs. Peterson, the blacksmith's wife, said bluntly one afternoon as they worked on quilts for the coming winter. "Gabriel Norwood is the finest catch in the territory, and he looks at you like you hung the moon." Trinity felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We're friends. He's been kind enough to offer me a place to stay while I get established." Mrs. Peterson snorted inelegantly. "Friends, is it? Well, I've never seen him look at any other friend the way he looks at you." Trinity couldn't deny the flutter of pleasure those words caused, but she kept her expression composed. "Mr. Norwood is a gentleman. He would never presume." "More's the pity," muttered Mrs. Peterson, returning to her stitching. "Sometimes a man needs to do a bit of presuming." The conversation lingered in Trinity's mind as she rode back to Silver Creek that evening. The truth was, she had begun to develop feelings for Gabriel that went far beyond friendship or gratitude. His quiet strength, his intelligence, his kindness to everyone from the youngest ranch hand to the oldest townsperson, all these qualities had worked their way into her heart. But she feared that his care for her stemmed more from compassion than deeper feelings. He had found her at her most vulnerable, had rescued her when she had nothing and no one. How could she be sure that what she felt, what either of them felt, was real and not born of those extraordinary circumstances? Trinity was so lost in these thoughts that she failed to notice the change in the weather until the first fat raindrops began to fall. She looked up to find dark clouds had gathered with startling speed, the wind picking up and the temperature dropping rapidly. Wyoming weather, she had learned, could change in an instant, and autumn storms could be particularly dangerous. She urged her mare to a faster pace, hoping to reach the ranch before the storm worsened, but within minutes, the rain had become a downpour. Lightning cracked overhead and the mare shied, nearly unseating Trinity. She fought to control the frightened animal, speaking soothingly despite her own fear. The trail, normally clear and familiar, had become treacherous with mud. Trinity knew she needed to find shelter, but the open plains offered few options. She remembered a lined shack about a half-mile off the trail that Gabriel had pointed out during one of their rides, a simple one-room structure where ranch hands sometimes stayed when working the distant parts of the property. Trinity turned the mare toward where she thought the shack might be, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push her in the opposite direction. The rain was coming down in sheets now, reducing visibility to mere yards. She was soaked through, her borrowed riding clothes plastered to her skin, her hair escaped from its pins and hanging in wet ropes down her back. After what felt like hours but was likely only 15 minutes, the dark outline of the shack appeared through the gloom. Trinity nearly sobbed with relief. She dismounted, led the mare to the small lean-to attached to the shack, and secured her there before pushing open the door and stumbling inside. The interior was dark and dusty, but mercifully dry. Trinity felt her way around until she found a lantern and matches. Her cold, wet fingers fumbled with the matches, but she finally managed to light the lantern, casting a warm glow throughout the small space. The shack was basic: a rough wooden table and chair, a narrow cot with a thin mattress, a small cast iron stove in the corner. Trinity immediately set about building a fire in the stove, grateful for the dry wood stacked beside it. Her hands shook with cold as she arranged the kindling and struck another match. The fire caught, and Trinity held her hands out to the growing warmth. She knew she needed to get out of her wet clothes but had nothing to change into. After a moment's hesitation, she removed her sodden jacket and riding skirt, hanging them on pegs near the stove to dry. Her thin cotton shirt and undergarments were also wet, but she kept them on, wrapping herself in a rough woolen blanket she found folded at the foot of the cot. The storm showed no signs of abating. Trinity sat on the cot, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the wind howl around the eaves. She wondered if Gabriel would worry when she didn't return on time. Would he come looking for her in this weather? The thought both comforted and concerned her. She didn't want him riding out in this storm, but the idea of spending the night alone in this remote shack was unsettling. Trinity must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, the door was being pushed open, and Gabriel stood in the entrance, rain dripping from his duster and hat. His expression when he saw her huddled on the cot transformed from worry to profound relief. "Trinity," he breathed, her name like a prayer on his lips. "Thank God, Gabriel," she said, rising to her feet, the blanket clutched around her. "You shouldn't have come out in this storm." He removed his duster and hat, hanging them beside her clothes. "When you didn't return, I feared the worst. The creek might have risen or you could have been thrown." He shook his head as if banishing the thought. "I had to find you." Trinity felt tears spring to her eyes at the concern in his voice. "I'm all right, just cold and wet." Gabriel crossed to the stove, adding more wood to the fire. "Your clothes are still damp," he observed, touching her jacket. "You should have taken everything off. You'll catch your death." Trinity felt a blush heat her cheeks despite the chill. That would hardly be proper. Gabriel's eyes met hers, a hint of amusement visible despite his concern. "Propriety seems less important than pneumonia, wouldn't you agree?" Trinity couldn't help but smile. "Perhaps. But I had no other clothes to change into." Gabriel reached into his saddlebag, which he'd brought in with him, and pulled out a clean flannel shirt. "It's dry, at least. I'll step outside while you change." "No," Trinity said quickly, glancing toward the window where rain still lashed against the glass. "It's pouring, just turn around." Gabriel nodded and turned to face the wall. Trinity quickly removed her wet shirt and undergarments, drying herself as best she could with the blanket before pulling on Gabriel's shirt. It engulfed her, the sleeves hanging well past her hands, the hem reaching nearly to her knees. But it was warm and dry and smelled of him, a clean, masculine scent that made her heart race. "You can turn around now," she said softly. When Gabriel faced her, Something changed in his expression, a softening, a heat that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. "The shirt suits you," he said, his voice deeper than usual. Trinity hugged herself, suddenly aware of her bare legs beneath the shirt's hem. "I must look a fright. My hair is beautiful," Gabriel interrupted. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "You're beautiful, Trinity. Surely you know that." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Gabriel, I've wanted to tell you for weeks now," he continued, taking another step closer. "But I feared it was too soon after your loss that you might think I was taking advantage of your situation." Trinity shook her head. "I would never think that of you." Gabriel was directly in front of her now, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, smell the rain on his skin. "What do you think of me then?" he asked quietly. Trinity looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her over these past months. "I think you're the most honorable man I've ever known. I think you saved me, not just from death in the wilderness, but from a life half-lived. I think—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "I think I've fallen in love with you, Gabriel Norwood." Gabriel's eyes darkened at her words. He raised a hand to her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "I've loved you since I found you behind that rock, rifle in hand, too proud to admit you needed help." "You're the bravest, most determined woman I've ever met, Trinity Owens." "They called me too wild back in Boston," Trinity whispered. "Too opinionated, too eager to speak my mind. They said no man would want a wife who couldn't be properly tamed." Gabriel smiled, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Out here, wildness is not a flaw but a virtue, and I would never want to tame you, Trinity. I love your spirit, your fire. I just want to ride beside you wherever your path may lead." Trinity's heart felt too full for her chest. "Even if that path leads to a schoolhouse in Willow Creek, even then," Gabriel assured her. "Though I hope it might also include Silver Creek Ranch as its mistress rather than its guest." Trinity lifted her hand to cover his where it rested on her cheek. "Are you asking me to marry you, Gabriel Norwood?" "I am," he said simply. "Not because you need my protection or because I feel responsible for you, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because I love you, Trinity Owens, wildness and all." Trinity rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, a gesture of pure instinct that felt more natural than breathing. Gabriel's arms encircled her, drawing her close as he returned the kiss with a passion that left her dizzy. When they finally parted, both breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he murmured. Trinity laughed, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "Yes, Gabriel, yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Willow Creek, with the entire town in attendance. Trinity wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Holloway and the women of the sewing circle had worked on in secret, and Gabriel looked more handsome than any man had a right to in his best suit. The celebrations lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting and more goodwill than Trinity had ever experienced in the supposedly civilized parlors of Boston. When Gabriel finally swept her onto his horse to take her home to Silver Creek Ranch, now truly hers as well, Trinity felt a peace and rightness that she had never known before. As they rode beneath the star-filled Wyoming sky, Gabriel's arms secure around her, Trinity thought of how far she had come from that terrified girl hiding behind a rock, how much she had lost and yet how much more she had gained. "Happy," Gabriel murmured against her ear. Trinity leaned back into the solid warmth of his chest. "Completely," she said truthfully. "Who would have thought that the Wild West would be where I finally found my place, where I found you?" Gabriel pressed a kiss to her temple. "Perhaps it's because out here there's room for wildness. Room to be exactly who you are." "And who am I, Gabriel Norwood?" she asked teasingly, his arms tightened around her waist. "You're Trinity Norwood, the wildest, most beautiful thing in Wyoming territory, and you're mine as I am yours." As their horse carried them toward home and their future together, Trinity knew that what had once seemed like the end of her world had merely been the beginning of a far greater adventure, one she would face with courage, with love, and with the man who had ridden beside her until her heart had found its rest.